Welcome back to the Dancing Oracle with me, Najia, and my guest, John. Uh, we're here for what we think is a trilogy, but it may go on longer. Who knows?
May.
I'm a psychic medium, and John has an interest in all things psychic and mystical, and we had talked about feng shui in episode 1 and ley lines in episode 2. We had to lay the foundation for the story of the angry Celt that is right next to his property, causing some serious things. And by the way, before I let John tell his story about the Celt, in honor of this month, All Things Celtic, please give a like, a share, subscribe for free to help more stories like this get out so that you can learn all about the spiritual world, which is the natural world. As you listen to these videos, you will learn that this is all natural. It's not exactly completely supernatural, it's natural. And we're trying to bring awareness to help you tune in. All right, John,
Good
tell
evening, dear.
us. Good evening. And John is in the UK, as you can tell. And I'm here in the States. I'm
I
here in
guess.
Philadelphia.
Okay, Najia. Um, well, let's start with the angry kilt. I live in a house with an adjacent house next door. We share a party line. It's called semi-detached in English.
Mm.
I don't know what the American equivalent phrase
Oh,
is.
it's called a twin.
A twin. Okay, right. Well,
Yeah, a
we have a
twin.
twin. And some time ago, an American psychic identified the fact that there was an entity at the far end of my twin house, nothing to do with my house, the far end of my twin house, whom she described as an angry Celt. Now, we mentioned briefly before that the Celtic races lived in England, inhabited, as far as we can tell, the whole of England at one time, and were gradually pushed westwards by the arrival of the Romans and later on by the Anglo-Saxons, the Germanic tribes, the Vikings. And so, if there is an angry Celt, as this entity is described, at the other end of my twin house, it's a very ancient entity because it's been around probably for at least 1400 years, maybe for longer. So it's pretty persistent.
It's
And it seems to
persistent.
be, yep, very upset with something.
Yeah.
Now, the energy line which I'm talking about exists at the end of the twin house at the far end, and it goes diagonally through the main bedroom of that house. And it's a negative energy line in the sense that everybody who's used that bedroom for sleeping in for the last 40 years or so has fallen seriously ill with various ailments. The energy line then goes through the corner of the house and out into the garden and along the boundary line with a neighboring house, nothing to do with my house, it just happens to be along the boundary line, and crosses the road into a field. And the field itself is significant because another psychic, nothing to do with this American psychic, another psychic who's a friend of mine, whose name is Kay, was here 30 years ago, back in the 1990s. And I was telling her about the energy line, and you and I, Najee, have already talked about dowsing, and
Yes.
I'd confirmed the existence of this energy line by dowsing at the far end of the twin house, and it was a substantial energy line. Energy lines vary in width. This one was about 3 feet wide, so quite big. And I spoke to Kay about it, and she said, "Well, let's go and have a look. Would you like the dowsing rod?" She said, "No, I don't need those. I'll tell you where it is." And sure enough, she stopped exactly where the energy line began and said it goes from here, and walked through a couple of paces and it said it ends here, which I knew from my dowsing. Then she said something interesting. She said, "But that's not all there is here, is there? And I was, well, as far as I know, um, what do you have in mind? She said, no, in the field opposite. Now we're talking about a field which is about 300 yards away from where the angry Celt is supposed to be active at the end of my twin house. She said,
Yes.
in the field opposite, there is something to do with an old pagan ritual. I'm not quite sure what, but it's an ancient pagan site. And I found this fascinating. I'd never heard this before. And I said, you mean that there was a pagan ritual there many centuries ago? He said, no, this one is quite recent, dates back to the 1970s or so. I thought,
Yeah.
my God, I mean, I know the part of the world I live in is very spiritual, but as far as I was aware, there weren't many pagan rituals going on in this part of England in the 1970s. So,
Yeah.
of course, I was intrigued. And she said it involves two men who either live or work in the neighborhood. And bear in mind that Kay had never been to this part of England before, so she knew nothing of it. But I said, well, do you have any idea of where they might be? She said, well, I could probably find it. And I knew that she was psychic. She'd come up for the weekend with her husband, so I knew them both very well. And I said, okay, this was a Friday night. I said, Saturday morning, you and I will go driving. You can tell me where you think these people lived or worked or were active, and we'll see how we go from there. And she said, I visualize the younger man, who by now be in his 40s. We're talking about the 1990s, so he was born, say, 1950 or so, something like that. So I visualize the younger man drinking in a pub not far from here. And I can visualize the pub, and he drinks alone at a bar on the left of the front door as you go in. I thought, this is very specific. And she
Yeah.
described the pub. Well, obviously, I know all the pubs around here. So immediately I had one in mind, but I didn't say anything to her. I thought, okay, tomorrow morning we'll drive around. I'll show you the various options of the different pubs, and you can decide which one. So I took her first to our nearest pubs, which are in a nearby village. And on the way down, she said, do you mind if I close my eyes because it helps me visualize more profoundly, more dramatically what is going on. I get the energies much more clearly if I close my eyes.
Yeah, so she's in the car as a
She's in
passenger,
the car. Bear in mind, this is England, so I'm sitting in the driving seat on the right, and she's sitting on my left, the
and she's
opposite
got her eyes closed and
She's
just
got her eyes closed
tuning in.
exactly like that, Najia. Right.
Yeah.
So we're driving towards the first pub in the village, and suddenly her right arm comes up like a semaphore right in front of my face, and yeah, momentarily disconcerting. And she points to a house across the road. So that's a terrible house, awful energies, very
Oh,
sick people there. To my certain knowledge, three people had died there within the previous 3 years. And I'd already said to Kay, I said, I'm not going to comment on anything because I don't want to prejudice any future comments by you. So I'll comment on them when we get back home, but just tell me what you feel at the time. So I thought,
very
Mark,
interesting. As soon as she felt
yes.
that energy, she goes
Oh,
like that,
absolutely. Yes, it came out like a semaphore.
and it's negative. It's
Very negative.
very negative.
So we proceeded, and I stopped in front of the first pub, and I said, "Okay, you can open your eyes. Is this it?" And she said, "No, nothing like it," which I was pretty sure was the case. Second pub, same thing. So I said, "Okay, well now we'll drive to where I think might be another possibility." In fact, the third pub I was pretty certain it was, and I said, "We'll drive towards where I think the men lived or worked, judging from the description of the house you gave, because as you can imagine, I know this area pretty well, but she had never been here before. So I said, look, what we'll do is this. You want to keep your eyes closed? Yes. I said, when we get to a junction, I'll give you the options, left, right, or straight on, and you can decide what to do. She took me
Hmm.
straight there. It wasn't
That's
a very
amazing.
complicated route, but it was, a couple of lefts and a right. No way would you have done it without
She's
having
in the
some sort of psychic connection.
she's in the passenger seat with her eyes closed, telling
Yep,
you
exactly
turn
that.
here, turn there. Oh my
Exactly that.
gosh.
And as we were approaching this house, she said, I can feel it's coming up on the left. which was true. I knew we were about 50 yards away from it. Now, excuse me, you could say that she was picking up my vibrations. Possibly she was.
Because you were anticipating it, what you thought was it.
Possibly, but I hadn't anticipated the reference to the sick house in the village on the way down. You know, that took me completely by surprise, and she was absolutely accurate about that one.
Yeah.
So bear that in mind as a possibility, but I don't think it happened. Anyway, she still had her eyes closed. I said, "Will you tell me when to stop?" She stopped right outside the entrance, which was a driveway up to the farmhouse, and she said, "The younger one definitely lived or worked here. I'm not sure. I don't think he's there now, but I'm sure he was there." I said, "Okay. Well, then we'll go on to the village, the next pub." And we went there, and sure enough, she stopped right in front of the pub, still with her eyes closed, and said, "This is it." And I knew the pub well, and it was a Saturday morning, so it was about, I don't know, 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, so it was just opening. So I said, "Okay,
Mm.
we'll go in for a drink." And we went through the front door, and I knew the landlord well. And the landlord, I did not want to tell the story to, because he's a very
No.
good landlord, but not the most discreet of fellows.
But it'd be all around the
Sure,
village
any secret be right round the village in half an hour. So I had to bring
in
up
half an hour.
as diplomatically as possible. And we did a bit of small talk and so on. And then I see, one time I came in here, there was a chap drinking there. I can't remember his name. And Kay had already described him. She said he's a young
Oh.
guy, and he always wears the same trousers, a bit scruffy. They're brown corduroy trousers. So I thought, oh, okay. So I said to the landlord, "Yeah, it's the chap who he sits on the corner of the bar here." He said, "Oh, you mean so and so, the guy who always wears the brown corduroy trousers?" And Kay looked at me, and I looked at Kay, and I thought,
Mm.
where do we go from here? So
Yeah.
we continued talking, and I didn't let the landlord into the secret, but it was enough to convince me that something was happening there. And we came back, and I told her everything which I've just described to you about the various places we visited, and she said, "Well, I'm not surprised." Said the event which took place across the road was probably unpleasant. Maybe it was a sacrifice of something or other, some animal or something, but the younger chap feels bad about it. The older fellow, not so much. I don't pick up so many vibrations from him, but I pick up the vibrations from the younger one who still regrets what happened, but it's still there. And I said, "Well, could you show me in the field where it might be?" So we went round the field or on the road, and we took what's the word I want? A cross section. So in that direction from one part of the field, in that direction from the other part of the field, and where they cross is roughly where the location is, within about 20 feet or so. So he said, "It's something there." So keep this in mind, Najia, because some weeks later, this is synchronicity. I got a call from somebody I'd never heard, and he said, "Are you John?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I've just picked up a book of yours at the second-hand bookshop in the next village." And I'd had a clear out of books which I'd read and which I was no longer going to read. And
Mhm.
this was an esoteric book. And I always like to hand books on because I feel inevitably that people who are ready for more information will pick the appropriate book. And the second-hand bookshop is a wonderful way to do it. So he picked up this particular book and I'd
You had written
forgotten
your
my
name and
name and address in it. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, and
So
your
he showed
address
me.
too,
Yeah.
in case it got lost or something.
I
I
just stamped
found
it in
it.
there. Honestly, I can't remember why, but it had been in there. So he said, "Oh, that's interesting." He said, I'm a farmer, but I'm also a chap who studies geopathic stress lines around the world." He'd had a lot to do with Canadian Indian communities looking at their burial mounds and burial sites. And
God,
this is a chap who
and to
lives
be in the UK
10
with that
miles from, yes.
background.
What sort of chance is that? And he phoned me
Yeah.
up. So I said, "Well, come round and we can have a chat." So we did. And we were sitting in my cottage, and we were talking about where we were. He said, "This is a very old house." And I said, "Well, yes, it goes back a while." He said, "I would say it probably goes back to about 1300. 14th century. I thought that's older than I would have thought, but what makes you
Yeah.
think that? He said, because this is what used to be a wayside inn. And a wayside inn is probably a phrase which most Americans wouldn't know, but it's an early sort of pub
Hmm.
uh, where travelers would stop and the horses would get watered and fed, and you'd have a beer or whatever they drank in those days. He said this used to be a wayside inn to service the site of worship across the road. And I hadn't mentioned a site of worship at that point. And I said, what makes you think that? He said, there was a site of pagan worship. I said, why do you think that? He said, well, that's what I'm picking up.
Mm.
Bear in mind, I spend a lot of my time around burial mounds and burial sites. And if you look at it, he said, I think you'll find this is in a direct line. And he named two churches, quite well-known churches in the locality within about 40 miles of us. He said, you'll see this is in a direct line between those two churches. And this was a pagan site, which is why the road configuration where we are is slightly strange. It doesn't make sense purely from the point of view of road users, but in essence, it goes right round the site, whereas purely from the road point of view, logically, it would have gone through the site, but it didn't go through the site because there was a pagan site there. So, of course, it went round. And I said, that's interesting. He said, I think if you dig over there, you'll find probably artifacts associated with that period of pagan worship. It's a very powerful site. Now, that's what led me to believe when I later on learned about the angry Celt. And I learned about the angry Celt maybe 15 or 20 years after this conversation, that the angry Celt was probably connected with this site of pagan worship because it's a bit too much of a coincidence that he should be active only 300 yards from this site. So I think maybe there is a connection. What the connection is, I'm not sure. And the problem, Najia, is this, that as you know from your psychic experiences, it's all very well to make contact with energies, but you have to be careful how you handle them.
Yeah.
And the last thing you want to do, bless you,
Excuse me.
the last thing you want to do is to activate negative energies in a way which might be detrimental to
Yes.
anybody's welfare.
Yes.
So I'm not in the, shall I say, not in the frame of mind to aggravate this angry Celt even further. I'd love to know what's aggravating him or her or it, however you want to describe it. Let's call it the entity.
Mm.
But I'm fairly certain from all the evidence which I've just discussed with you that this entity might be something to do with the pagan site of worship across the road.
Yes.
And when you go from there to other parts of the locality, there are various anomalies in the landscape, the road configurations and so on, which lead you to believe there were other things there hidden away, hidden from our modern eyes anyway. Um, you'll find a lot, for example, of ancient villages in England, which are only now being discovered because when they've done aerial photography, especially with drone photography now, with special cameras, I think they're called something like ground resonance cameras, they sense anomalies in the density of the earth subsoil. And there
Yes.
you can find old foundations and so on, where the soil dries out at different rates because there might be stone foundations beneath that particular bit of soil. Anyway, around here, there are various anomalies of that sort, which may go back to the Middle Ages, because you have to remember that when the Black Death struck Europe in 1346, an estimated one-third of Europe's population died during this Black Death, including probably about one-third of the English population. So many villages were completely depopulated and abandoned, and thereafter never repopulated as the population gradually recovered. They built new places, probably because they associated these old centers of the Black Death
Yes.
with death, logically enough, and they didn't want to live there anymore. That's utterly understandable. So they gradually fell into disuse. They might have used some of the materials for building new houses, I don't know.
Mhm.
And so eventually they were ploughed over. Um, so what lies in that field exactly, I don't know. I'm tempted to ask the owners if we could do a ground resonance survey of it, but I'm slightly concerned about what we might find, and even more concerned about what might happen if we disturbed what we might
Yeah,
find.
energetically, yeah.
So that's the situation. This psychic, Kay, she's still very active. She's somebody who had it from childhood on. She said it's a bit like having a radio station without control over the station knob.
Mm,
You find yourself tuning into stations you hadn't intended to. You're getting messages, and you're not always sure what these messages mean until events a few days or a few weeks later indicate to you exactly why you got the message. And she's a fascinating woman. I hope to be seeing her again soon. But I'm sure this subject will come up. So this is a situation of where we live. And because it's in a rural area, I think it's easier to be more aware of the spiritual energies which exist in this area, rather more so than if you're in a city. Because in a city, one's physical and visual and audio distractions are so great that you've got to be exceptionally well focused to tune in to um,
oh,
energetic entities which probably are going to pass you by in that sort
that's,
of location. Whereas
yes.
in the countryside, you have much more tranquility, more time, more silence for them to take effect. And if you open yourself up to them, then you begin to see more and more, as with anything in life. It's like reading a book. If you don't open the book, you can't understand what's going on inside it.
Now, John, do you think that, that fear of opening that book, because you don't know what you're going to find, do you think that is one of the reasons that most people are afraid or don't go and delve into their own psychic energies?
Um, I think honestly, Najia, it's more likely that it has never occurred to most people because I'm generalizing now, but we live in a society in the West where such things are gradually becoming more prominent, but they've been dormant for so long. And I think the Industrial Revolution, despite all the good it's obviously done to our physical welfare and our health and our longevity, that's beyond dispute, has also unfortunately damaged a lot of the spiritual connections which we had with the world around us. Some people are naturally drawn to re-establishing those connections, and gradually more and more people are being drawn into that way of life. And I think possibly people who are listening to our discussion now are going to think to themselves, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Well, let's have a look around. And if you open your eyes, and I'm talking here energetically rather than
Yeah,
visually, if you
yes,
open your eyes, you begin to see things you hadn't seen before. And
absolutely.
all this is dormant within us. We have the receivers, to use the analogy of the radio. It's just they need to be switched on. And if we're instructed how to switch them on, that's good. But we
Mhm.
have to proceed with caution because we're dealing with energies quite often which are obviously far more powerful than we are. So treat them with care. Don't chance it. Be benevolent. Always have the right motive. If you try and attract energies to you with the wrong motive, just
Yeah.
as a very superficial example, if you're trying to attract the energies to give you the next lottery winning numbers,
Oh, yeah.
you're going to fail. That's what I mean. Or if you're trying to attract energies to enable you to get promoted over somebody whom you know is actually better suited to the promotion than you are, because you're jealous, that is going to attract negative energy to you because your motives have to be essentially benevolent. If your motives are benevolent, you may make mistakes, you may face challenges which you otherwise wouldn't have faced, but your foundations are solid and you'll come through it. This is the point to bear in mind. Proceed with caution, but read every book or have every conversation you can on the subject. And it's so rewarding. Life becomes so much more agreeable. And I'm very blessed because living in the countryside, as I have done for 40 years or so, I have received energies of wonderful benevolence just by being here. But I'm open to them.
Yes.
that I feel enthralled by them, and they help produce tranquility. Tranquility, in essence, helps to promote your physical and your mental and your emotional health, of course. I mean, one day we all die. Yes, that's true. But the nature of the decline and the manner of the death is to some extent under our control, to some extent.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
if we can fade out in an agreeable way, we're very lucky. Many people don't, of course. They fade out hooked up to tubes and uh, pipettes and needles and everything else. That's very sad. There's no guarantee it won't happen to us. But
Mhm.
what we can do, if we behave with the right motives, is to load the odds in our favor. And that produces a constant tranquility and enjoyment of life. And it radiates from us as well, Najia, because other people find us agreeable company. I mean,
Yeah, they feel that.
we can
If they
all
like the
convince.
sunshine, if they like the light and the sunshine,
Exactly, Darren.
if they like to keep things dark, you might irritate them with your
I
light,
mean, we've all come across people who think, oh, God, not him again. And you're forced to listen to, half an hour of somebody talking exclusively about themselves, and you're trying to be polite, or somebody who monopolizes a dinner party conversation. For God's sake, when are you going to shut up? We've heard all this before. Um, the best conversationalists are invariably those who ask you questions. Uh, the ones who talk exclusively about themselves become boring in the end. But okay, you give them a bit of leeway. That's true.
because
But
sometimes, they're like a little kid and they need the attention. Maybe they didn't get it as a kid. You
yeah,
try.
when they're 3 years old,
I
you're
know.
much more tolerant.
Sometimes people still have those wounds, so I tend to be
No,
compassionate,
you're right. You
you
you listen
know.
you listen to the ramblings of a 3 year old with great patience and enthusiasm because you can
Oh
see
yeah.
a human being in the making and you help them along.
Yeah, and
Uh,
then they mature and they're not going to end up
yeah,
like
but when
that
they're still
guy
talking
later
like that
on.
when they're 33 or 43, you think, for
Yeah.
God's sake, haven't you learned anything in life? And it's part of the tranquility, part of the, what should I say, the advantage of tranquility is that other people seek you out because they sense that tranquility and you benefit from whatever they bring to the conversation. And most of what we learn not by talking, but by listening. We have
Hmm.
to talk in order to produce the right words to listen, but
Yeah.
talking initiates it, listening completes it. And
And
we often forget that in our society.
there's all kinds of listening because we're bombarded. I mean, we forget the inner
Yes.
listening, like in the second episode, which I highly recommend everyone check out.
Mm.
We talked about your you know, the Kalahari of the Bushmen of the Kalahari and how they
Yes.
can communicate across miles.
Yes.
Detailed conversations without a cell phone, of course.
Yes.
This is on the inner. They've been doing this for I don't know how many
Tapping in the heart.
years.
Yes,
I
that's what.
studied the Bushmen in high school, so I'm familiar with what you're talking about. But I also had read some books, about the Aborigines in Australia. They do the same thing.
Yes,
And then some of the Native Americans do that. They can communicate across the miles. They know where everybody is. They literally
that's
just
right. You
do
do.
it in their mind. And I don't know if you've heard this,
Yeah.
John. The biggest sensation on YouTube right now
Yeah.
is the telepathy tapes. Have you heard of those?
No, 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 I haven't. No.
Well,
That's what
it's
it's
all
called.
about listen to this. So it all started with, okay, we have to have a whole other conversation about this, but everyone go look this up. It's fascinating. And then you'll understand that this is not paranormal we're dealing with. This is normal.
Yes,
We're just shutting it out in our
we can all
culture.
do it.
So listen, this all
And
started with
then- yeah.
autistic children who can't speak. They're not verbal, right?
Mm.
But they would know what their parents, their mom's needs, their teacher. They would have flashcards, and the kids would know the flashcard before she even held it up because she can see that. So they're reading the teacher's mind, they're reading their parents' mind, and they did studies on this. And they also, I mean, they made studies like they would have them in separate rooms. or hundreds of feet away from each other, and they would do the cards, and the kids would, whatever the scientist pulled out, or the parent who's in this experiment, that's the same card the kids would pull out. They would know.
Oh,
They would know, and they're nonverbal.
yeah,
The college kids, they're nonverbal because they're highly autistic. And then what was so cool, and I have to go into this more because I only watched a little bit,
yeah.
they all can hang out in this other space in a different realm together.
They communicate with each other.
Yes, without ever meeting, and they know each other. And they have all these conversations. So it's kind of what these the Bushmen did, the Native Americans, some of the Native Americans that I've looked into. Definitely the Aborigines are known for doing this. I think a lot of people, we've read all those books popular in the 1990s, about Dreamtime and the Aborigines and all kinds of things. So we're a little bit more familiar with that, but it's kind of what we're talking about. But we've
Yes,
tuned
it is.
it
And
out because
what
we're
we've
not in the
forgotten.
country. Yeah, we're like over bombarded with cell phones, traffic, big buildings, too much crowd, and you're out in the country, you're more receptive.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, in terms of what you've just described, with the telepathy channel, what these people and American Indians and Aborigines and Kalahari Bushmen are doing is, in terms of human history, completely normal. Our inability to do it is abnormal because
Yes.
it's so to speak a muscle which has atrophied because we haven't used it for the last 200 years or so. They
Yes,
don't
and,
need a telephone to communicate. We
and the
need a telephone because we've forgotten how to communicate.
and the young ones, like my niece, I mean, she's like in her late 30s, and all this other generation, right? They
Yes,
can't speak to each other. They text each other in the same room. My
yes,
niece can't have a conversation on the phone.
really.
I know a lot of people can't have a conversation on the phone. They have a hard time even in person, but they get full of anxiety. They only know how to text. They only know Facebook. And I know a lot of people in their 30s and 40s that cannot operate any other way. They have severe anxiety.
That's very interesting. So you're looking at a different group of people. At my age, I don't meet people like that because all my generation are used to telephoning each other or reading books or whatever. We use a mobile phone purely as a mobile phone if we need to call somebody. Um, but you're talking about a generation which is entirely alien in
I
its
know.
behavior to mine. I've
It's
heard about it, but I've never actually experienced it.
I'm dealing with it and it's a problem. I'm having a lot of problems dealing with it.
Yeah.
And then they don't even use words, they use initials. When I'm supposed to know these initials, what they mean. I have to go in my computer and go urban lingo for whatever, whatever,
Really?
TTY or whatever,
Yeah.
TTL. Like, I don't know, TTYL or something. I'm like, what the hell?
History to me.
Just, just type it out. If you can't speak, at least type it out. I have to go, it's like figure this all out, like a whatever. They don't even use words. So you're from the UK, right?
Yeah.
So what I love about the British is, I mean, I used to have a British boyfriend years ago,
Aha.
but many years ago when I lived in New York. And the way they describe anything, like it's not like they use an adjective, like we'll use an adjective to describe something, but they have a way. It's almost poetic of um putting together words. Like I think because I was asking you about your feng shui,
Yes.
and there was something you said that was so British. It was so the way you expressed yourself. And you were talking about how it's you've done this since the early 90s,
Yes.
but it was the way you said it. It was like your lens of the world or something, or what did you tell me before we got on the video?
I, oh gosh, how did I describe it now? So,
Wish I wrote it down. It was it was fantastic.
the early
And I said
90s.
only a Brit would say it like that, you know?
Yeah, we have our own syntax and
Well, it's not,
more speech. It's
it's just
true.
that it's more visual.
Ah, yes, yes.
You're more visual, like closer to poetry, closer to th- the written word, You know, back in the day when somebody expressed themselves, like we're losing our ability to speak and communicate. We're dumbed down. You know, especially American society, really dumbed down. And
British
that's
society too.
really, it's also why
Yeah.
we have who we have in office. You know, people are dumbed down. They're not using critical thinking. They're not really exploring.
It's said, really, Najia, that about 20% of our school population leaves school at the age of 18, functionally illiterate,
Mm.
which is extraordinary in the sixth richest nation of the world. I mean, functionally illiterate means, in essence, they can't describe their feelings or create a sentence and write it down on paper, um, or read for that matter. And this is extraordinary. It's gone downhill so fast.
So they don't teach writing anymore in school. Do you know that? Like, and they stopped teaching
Yeah, I've heard
cursive
this.
about 15 years ago in the town, in this area, Philadelphia, Delco. They stopped teaching cursive. And I remember like my one student's son, and he's in his mid 40s, I think now. Maybe they stopped 20 years ago in Montgomery County. But she was saying he didn't know how to sign his own name because they stopped teaching cursive at like one of the maybe T or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
He couldn't write his full name. And I said, God, Joan, it's like cursive is our own secret code for the older people. But I heard they stopped teaching printing now. So they only type.
really.
They don't know how to write. And you know that the psychic abilities, there's something, especially with cursive,
Yes,
expressing something from your heart and from
yes, it
your
does.
subconscious.
You can read somebody's handwriting.
Yes, and your subconscious comes out in cursive. And I meant like if you journal and you don't know what's wrong, if you start to journal, we're so off topic. I know we could talk forever, but you know, it comes out in cursive. So anyway, it's like getting back to these old ways. We talked in the first episode about those energy lines, the ley lines, which have different, you know, gases or water or other
Yes,
things that
yes,
would upset someone's body if you're sleeping on it versus walking and standing upright on it and spending a little bit of time in that space, but how severely it can affect the health. So we're no longer sensitive to that. And we have, you know, even the animals and the plants are sensitive to it, but we've become disconnected to our fullness. And the whole purpose of this whole series, I mean, besides like, oh, what's going on with the angry Celt, but it's learning about psychics, learning about our psychic abilities, learning about tuning in, accepting that this is real, this is normal, this is normal. What we do is unnatural, right?
yes,
Reality.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
What
We,
most people do is unnatural. I'm just saying what me and you do. You're tuned into feng shui. You really know it and you're super sensitive. It's your lens, it's how you view the world, everything you see through that. And how I view things through my sensing, through my psychic senses, and then channeling sometimes clairaudience and tuning into spirit or having the visual codes that come through the light. So different ways of perceiving that are more expanded. But they're, you have to,
exactly in our society. And yet, Najia, if you and I were having this conversation in one of the traditional societies we've spoken about, the people who are listening would say, well, yeah, that's obvious. So what's your point?
exactly,
It wouldn't,
right?
it wouldn't strike them as abnormal at all. As well, yes, of course. I mean, it's like say two and two make four. We know that. Well, what are you trying to tell us? But for people in our society, this sort of topic sometimes is a revelation. It sets them off on a new path, which is both very heartening and saddening at the same time because it shouldn't be a new path. It should be a well trodden path which has been trodden by their ancestors and their contemporaries and by their descendants. And yet
Mm.
that's a path which we're veering away from. Some of us are coming back to it through our own good fortune. Yes, you need your own effort to do it, but it very much helps, of course, if you're in contact with people who are already on that path. They say, well, don't take a left turn here, try a right turn, see? Now you can see something which you wouldn't otherwise have seen. I'm speaking obviously metaphorically, but that's the way it often goes. If you go for a walk in the woodland, you take a dog with you, for example. If it's
Oh,
possible.
yes, because they have
Let
the
let the
sensitives.
dog off the lead, because where the dog goes is probably a nice place to go, because humans and dogs share both joy and antipathy for certain types of energy. And if you let the dog roam, follow the dog, you'll probably find yourself in a very benevolent place. I'm not
Yes.
talking about going into a wild forest in Canada where there are still predators. I'm talking about going into a forest such as you find in the English countryside, where I have to say we're at the top of the food chain. We don't have anybody else
Yeah.
to worry about. Nobody's looking at us with the idea of dinner in mind. But I've found this walking with dogs. It makes such a huge difference. I don't have a dog at the moment, but when I did have, um, inevitably I would follow it, and it would take me to places I wouldn't have considered, and stop there and sniff around and lie down and have a rest. And if I sat down there, I would feel good, and I'd come back there afterwards because the dog would have showed me. All we have to
Mm.
do is let the life around us show us what there is, because it's all connected to us. It can't be otherwise when you think about it. When you walk down the country lanes here, which I hope one day you will, because I'd
Oh, I
love
do.
you to
I know
come
you're
over
so
here.
kind to invite me.
And as we know, you know all the trees and bushes around, but all the trees and bushes around also know you. And you get an enormous amount of tranquil energy from them as you're walking along. You feel wonderful. You feel energized. You feel peaceful. You're among friends.
Yeah.
And what more can you ask for? You don't need much else. And that's why I feel so blessed living where I do. If I were living in downtown Manhattan or East End of London, I wouldn't get the same sort of chances as I've got now. So I'm
True.
fortunate.
So true.
Yeah, yeah,
You know
yes,
what I wanted to ask you for clarification,
yeah,
because about this angry cult, because you've had two different psychics refer
yes,
to this, like I think 17 years apart, around
roughly. Yeah, yeah,
roughly.
roughly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the first psychic was just to clarify for everybody, if you can versus, and the second psychic was, to the
The first psychic was the American lady
mm-hmm,
who
is
mentioned this,
K.
never having been over. No, Kay was the second
Oh,
psychic.
the sec K
Sorry,
is the
I beg your pardon.
second.
No, we're getting the wrong around. Kay was the first psychic who mentioned it. The second psychic, the American lady, who had never been to England and still,
Okay.
in essence, the same thing. And you and I mentioned this briefly. The where the bedroom of my neighbouring house is used to be a workplace, so it was converted into a bedroom
Mm-hmm.
sometime 50 years ago now, roughly. Um,
Or a
where
more solid building, it was more like,
Yeah, it was
wasn't
included
even a home. It
as
was
part of the house. It was an extension, you could say,
yeah.
as a habitable part of the house. Now, I don't know, because I wasn't here at the time, whether the angry Celt only manifested this negative energy after that extension was built, because somehow the extension had disrupted his place of refuge. I don't know,
Yeah.
but it's something to think about, because quite often I've seen this with my Feng shui practice, that when you alter the configuration of a house, you put an extension on, it may be beneficial. On the other hand, it may disrupt the energies of the house and lead to disharmony. It's something which you have to judge on a case by case basis. I have no idea about this particular case, but I'm just speculating that that might have something to do with it, because the people who lived here 60, 70, 100 years ago obviously are long gone.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there was any illness in that part when they were living here, but it was a part where people walked through. It was a place where they did some work. So
Mm-hmm.
remember, when you're vertical, you're far less susceptible to negative energy than when you're lying down, because when you're lying down, your entire body is exposed, whereas when you're vertical, it comes through your feet and you're passing through it. So we made that analogy some time ago. If you smoke one cigarette a week or something, it's hardly likely to have much effect on it. If you're smoking 40 a day,
For
that's the
decades.
effect of prolonged negative energy. And even if you manage to extricate yourself from that situation, the after effects are likely to be with you for years to come. There's the problem.
Yes.
So this is speculation, and it probably will remain speculation in terms of the angry Celt, because the last thing I want to do is to make it angrier. Um,
I know because you're kind of, I'm like almost, I was tempted to read tarot cards and oracle on him, but I'm afraid. I'm
well,
afraid.
I think you're right to be cautious because
Yeah, I am. I don't have, I
he's
already have
doing
enough.
limited harm, substantial harm, but limited harm. If it's tied in some way with the site of pagan worship across the road,
It could be pretty
I don't
serious.
know, but it seems quite likely. So until we have greater knowledge, and when my psychic friend Kay comes up here, we'll see if she can unravel a bit more because she's tuned in to a far greater depth than I am for this sort of thing. She picks up things that I don't. Feng Shui is a practice which you can learn. Okay, of course, you may have talent at it more than others, but psychic ability, probably you're born with some, and then you develop it because you have a natural tendency in that direction.
Yeah.
Whether it can be learnt, I'm not so sure. You have to have the inherent ability there to begin with. Well, like being a Mozart, everybody can learn music, everybody can learn to play an instrument, but up to a certain standard. The exceptional individual plays to a far higher standard. The exceptional athlete plays to a far higher standard because that's the way they're wired up.
I
But
think to be
physical,
exceptional at it, yes, but
yes.
have to
So,
be wired. But I think everyone can has some
oh,
psychic
I'm sure you're
potential.
right. I'm sure everyone can, to a greater or lesser extent, participate in what we're talking about, and usually with great advantage, provided the motive is a pure one.
Yes.
And this is most important. If it's only uh, for self-aggrandizement, I can never say the word.
And,
Um,
yeah, aggrandizement. Yes.
yeah, thank you. It's unlikely to come off well because sooner or later life catches up with you. Say, you remember that time when you screwed so and so just to get your own way? Well, here it's coming back to you.
Yeah.
And there's always a balance in life, and it won't always go right. But we also touched on this before that the longer your time frame by which you order your life, the more likely you are to reach your goals. As I said before, prisons are full of people who live life by a short time frame. It's a disaster to do that. 3-year-olds can get away with it because they live by the day,
Yeah.
because they don't know anything. They've got no responsibilities. They're looked after. They make their mistakes, such as they are. Mummy and daddy pick up the pieces and say, no, that's wrong. That's not the way you do it. It's this way. Ah, okay. But when you're still doing that when you're 33, not a good idea. So the longer your time frame by which you operate, the more likely you are to succeed. It's not a guarantee of success. It's just loading the odds in your favor. And
Yes.
why not if you can?
Well, John, it's been so wonderful. I mean, this has been a wonderful
Thank you, Najia. No,
conversation.
it's been a great pleasure and exciting for me too, because it's so nice to be able to speak to you like this. I know we have conversations off screen as well, but
I
it's
know,
something that I always value.
but you've
So
been
I'm looking
so
forward to more.
generous. Oh, thank you. You've been, I don't, most times people come on to YouTube because they have a business or a channel they're promoting, but John has dedicated hours of his time because we've had pre-conversations and planning, and now this is the third episode, and he's been just so generous with his knowledge and his experience. And I just want everyone to realize that he's being a little private, so I don't have contact information for him, which I normally would provide for a
Hmm.
guest. Um, but I really thank you because I know it's been a lot. He did some research and drawings and other things for me, so I would understand the situation ahead of time. I really
But
thank
it's
you.
been wonderful for me, Najia, because it's been a blessing for me because we've been talking, I've been learning, listening to you, seeing how you operate, what your insights are. There's much more to talk about. I'm sure we will. But this has been a delightful evening.
Oh, it
I
has been. When do
look
you think
forward to the next one.
Well, I think we will have another, your psych,
I hope so.
think your psych, well, we'll have other ones. I want to do dowsing with you. Maybe we'll come on and douse together about, you know why? Because, well, okay. I'll talk about that after. We'll talk about that after. But listen, you just mentioned about your psychic friend coming and maybe finding out more about the Celt and more about this whole ritual place
Yes.
across the way and
If I
what,
find out more, I shall certainly share it with you.
yes,
Go on for
maybe,
now. I have no predictions to make. I simply don't know. But that's the state of
yeah.
play at the moment.
You find out more, you let me know. You send
I
me
will
an
be in
email
touch.
or WhatsApp,
Yeah,
WhatsApp text or whatever.
yeah.
And boy, we'll come on and do a follow-up if we find out if you find out more from the psychic. I'm actually afraid to tap into that energy. I was thinking of tapping in with the cards, as I said, but
Yes, proceed with caution.
I know because
Um,
right now I'm gonna have surgery next week, so I'm, this week actually.
really. Oh,
Another surgery. Anyway, so I'm, kind of just need,
you're going to be out of commission for a couple of days.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, I just don't want to make myself any more vulnerable than I will be.
No, you're absolutely correct to do that.
So
It's much better. Put yourself in, what should I say, energetically a neutral state.
yeah, just gonna
Get
keep.
over your surgery, whatever you have to have done, and then concentrate on what comes afterwards.
Yeah,
Don't debilitate yourself by trying to do something about this whilst you're expecting your surgery. It doesn't work
yeah,
like
definitely. I mean,
that.
yeah, and I'm only just curious. It's not, a need to consult the cards. Let's put it that way.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
Well, you're curious. I'm curious too,
I
but
know. Well, you know what? We'll see. Maybe when I'm in a stronger state, Uh, but right now, it's been a lot of things with health going on for
yeah,
quite a while. Get a little tired of it.
understood, understood. But we'll
Yeah.
talk more about those later, I'm sure.
Yeah, and then
See what ideas we come up with.
yeah, I have ideas. Listen to me. I have ideas to talk with you about. I have plenty, but I know it's been a long evening. We've had hours and hours
Yes,
on these
that's been
videos
great.
and a break in
Uh,
between. So listen, everybody, thumbs up, hit the like button. It helps this type of a video get out to more people, help spread the channel. Subscribe for free. If you want to have psychic readings, there's an Oracle membership with me and do live chats and things like that and private videos. That's all available. That actually helps support the channel, but the free ways, are also help this information get out there.
You're right. I hope anybody who listens to it comes out with a few more ideas than they had to begin with,
I hope
and
so, and try some things out,
see
right?
what happens. Well, you'll get the feedback one way or the other.
I want
Yeah.
to play with dowsing with you on the next one.
I'm more of an observer than a practitioner when it comes to
Ah,
dancing.
you're more an observer?
I'm not the world's greatest dancer, but we
Oh,
might
no, not
consider that.
dancer. I mean dowsing.
Oh, sorry, I understood
Oh, you
dance.
thought I meant dancing.
Yes, no, dance is another matter altogether. Yes, that I.
Oh, we'd have you belly dancing on one of them.
No way, no way, no.
Let's see John belly dance.
No, I'm thinking, my God, I don't want to dance in front of people on YouTube. Dancing is another matter.
But maybe people, I've seen other psychics do dowsing and they ask questions and they ask, is give me a yes and give me a no. And then
Yes,
they'll ask all kinds of questions. I've never done it before.
yes, you can do that. It's very easy, but I'd recommend people just practice. Make yourself a couple of dowsing rods. It's so simple. Just some wire, as I said before, coat hanger, straight
Yeah.
it up, cut it in half, bend each end to about the length of your fist, and you're up and running.
You're up and running and you can look for water, Layla. You can look for different energies underground of your house that way.
Well, try it with simple things to begin with. As we mentioned before, get a few cups or something, put a sugar cube or a coin under one cup, and see where the dowsing rod cross over, and that's probably where your coin or sugar cube is, whatever. Practice, because
That's
that's
fun. I'm
that's the
gonna
way to start. It's very simple, completely free. You can do it in the
I
privacy of your own home. Get whoever is your other half to hide the coin for you, and then see how you go, and you'll get
know.
better at it as you practice.
I'm gonna do that with the grand
Well,
nephews and niece. Yeah,
yeah,
I can't
well, they'll love
do
it.
it with
Yes,
them. They're gonna
yeah,
love it, especially the little one's psychic. He's a psychic medium. He's the 10-year-old. He's
perfect,
actually a really good
perfect.
medium. Yeah. And luckily his mom encourages it. She
Good.
doesn't discount it. She listens to his advice because he's always right. He has have stories about him. Oh my God. He's amazing.
That's
But next
great.
time we'll talk and thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Susan.
you for your time.
It's been a
Take
great pleasure
care.
and a privilege.
Oh,
You
all
speak
right.
soon, Najia.
Thank you.
Good night.
All right. Bye-bye. Cheers.